in July 1869. The date 1870 on her gravestone in Findlay is incorrect. Bee's mother, Hattie, in her teens. Hattie, now grown up. Hattie married Frank Parlett, a trainer and racer of trotting horses. Frank died an untimely death from complications from a broken collarbone. The injury occurred when he fell from his sulky during a race in Bowling Green, Ohio. According to Hattie, the accident occurred when a wheel came off of the sulky. Frank's family lived in St. Mary's, Kansas. The newspaper account of Frank's death reads as follows. The many friends of Frank Parlett, the veteran horseman, will be sorry to learn of his death, which occurred at the home of his parents at St. Mary's, Kansas, last Monday night. Mr. Parlett was well known in this city as a skilled horse trainer, and it was he that brought out the celebrated horse Galbator. The indirect cause of Mr. Parlett's death was due to the accident which occurred at Bowling Green several years ago. He was driving in a race when the horse became frightened and ran away. Mr. Parlett was thrown from the bike and his collarbone was broken. He also sustained internal injuries. For many years, Hattie operated the Altmeyer Hotel restaurant in Findlay. The hotel was later renamed Fort Findlay. This was the dining room when Hattie had the restaurant. The middle person behind the counter is Frank Arrington, who managed the dining room for her. This picture was probably taken in the late 1920s. This is the kitchen of the restaurant with Hattie and her kitchen crew. Hattie is on the left, Frank Arrington on the right. Hattie went to work every morning at 4 a.m. and did the baking for the day, as many as 70 pies and cakes. She was well known for her good pastries. Rex Coldren of the Coldren Funeral Home was a young teenage taxi driver in those early years and would pick her up and take her to work. Here is Hattie again, third from the left, with 3 of her cooks standing behind the restaurant. Hattie with her sister Iva, always called Ivy, in their later years. Ivy, the youngest of the 3 children, married Wheeler Kreider. Ivy and Wheeler made their home in Sears, Michigan for years. Their children were Darrell and Doral, who died in infancy, Mabel, Arthur, who was always called Ami, and Farrell. Ami died in a tragic accident, decapitating himself with a chainsaw when he reached overhead to cut limbs in his front yard. Ivy's son, Farrell, with his wife. Hattie, near the end of her life. She died in May 1962 at the age of 92 and is buried in Maple Grove Cemetery in Findlay beside her daughter Bee. We now turn to Hattie's children. This is Bee on the left with her older sister Verna, always called just Vern, and her little brother Glenn. Vern was 2 years older and Glenn was 2 years younger than Bee. Bee was born in June of 1891. Bee when a young girl. Her class picture in Horton, Ohio, a one-room school for all grades. This is the dirt floor home in Horton, Ohio, where Bee grew up with Grandma Fellers. It is not known who Grandma Fellers was, whether family related or not. Vern and Glenn lived for some years in the children's home in Findlay. The circumstances causing this family disruption are not known. The people in the picture include, from left to right, a Kreider boy, Hattie's brother David, Bee, Ad Kreider, the first boy's father and brother to Wheeler, 2 more of Ad's children, Ad's wife, and presumably Grandma Fellers. Hattie's brother David, no doubt named after his maternal grandpa, was called Davy by everyone. He was born in 1871 and died in 1940 at the age of 69. He never married, loved cornbread and applesauce, and did farm labor all his life. He is buried in the Wharton, Ohio Cemetery. This is Bee's sister and brother, Verna and Glenn, when quite young. The picture might have been taken when they lived with their grandparents for a time in St. Mary's, Kansas, following their father's death. This is Glenn, not long before his death from TB at 19. His illness is apparent in this picture. This is Snowden Parlett, a half-brother to Bee's father. The picture was taken in 1902 when Snowden was 20 years old. Bee again, now is a beautiful young woman, probably in her middle teens, and with her usual very sober expression, one that she wore all of her life. A very well-dressed Bee. A very lovely Bee. Bee's older sister at 23 upon returning to Findlay after attending her brother Glenn's funeral in Kansas. Bee and sister Vern with two friends. Left to right are Bee, an unknown friend, Vern, and Ruby Stegman. Bee worked in two different factories in Findlay in her early years, a glove factory and a cigar factory, probably before her marriage to Art. In this picture, she is front and center with some of her fellow factory workers. We now turn to Art and Bee's romantic years. Here is a very dapper Art standing in front of his family home at 120 Edith Avenue in Findlay. Art was a very good dancer. Bee confessed she was wild over him. Art even more dapper. He has his big Model 3A Kodak slung over his shoulder, a camera which goes back to 1914 or 1915. It was a bellows camera that took 6 postcard pictures on 122 roll film. The camera is still in the family. This is Bee. At the time of this picture, she was either dating or newly married to Art. Art is taking the picture. Here is Bee and Art with Luella and Thornton Taylor. Remember that Luella was Art's younger sister. Art was into picture taking all his life and left a fine record of family photographs. The two couples once again. The car makes this shot a real period photo. Thornton Taylor, incidentally, was the brother of Tell Taylor, composer of the famous old tune Down by the Old Mill Stream. That stream was none other than the Blanchard River, which flows through Findlay. Tell Taylor owned and lived on a farm at the edge of Findlay on East Sandusky Street, which he turned into a golf course. Eventually, it became the Hancock County Fairgrounds. This is Art the Bird Hunter, a picture taken in the Florida Everglades, where he and Bee went on their honeymoon and where they lived for a while in the Sebring area. He could really bring them down. This is the wedding picture of Art's oldest sister, Gertrude, right front. Her husband, Charles Whistler, left front, was from Marion, Ohio, where they resided all their married lives. Gert and Charlie in front of their State Street home in Marion. This is Art's Jackrabbit Apperson 8 touring car in front of the Whistler home. This was the family car in the mid-1920s. Charles Whistler in his later years. His vocation had been sign painter at the Huber factory in Marion, famous for their old-time threshing machines. His avocation was playing violin, flute, and piccolo in theater orchestras. Here we see Bee on the right with Charlie and Gert. A Fred Nichols family gathering at the old homestead on Edith Avenue after the kids were grown and married. The father is absent. On the left is Gert with her husband, Charles Whistler. Luella's husband, Thornton, is sitting on the steps. Next is the mother, Luella. Then Art and Bea on the right. The daughter, Luella, is taking the picture. Art became an automobile mechanic in 1912 at age 23. Here he is in his middle years with